Can 7,000 eyewitnesses be wrong? We're going to talk tonight with a very special guest of mine, author of several fabulous books. Philip Imbrogno is a recognized authority in the field of UFO research. He has been interviewed by the New York Times, Coast to Coast AM, and has appeared on NBC's Today Show and the Oprah Winfrey Show, and has been featured in documentaries on the History Channel, A&E, Lifetime, and HBO. Imbrogno worked closely with many top UFO investigators, including Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Bud Hopkins. He has been a science educator for the past 26 years with a graduate degree in chemistry and undergraduate degrees in astronomy and earth science. I found Philip's work on my own personal journey by discovering Celtic mysteries back in this winter, and over the past few months, those of you who follow my blog and my Facebook page, I've been sharing several experiences that I've personally had down at the Stone Chambers as I live in Albany, New York, upstate New York. I found myself wrapped up in a very unusual experience, and I hope to talk to Philip about that tonight to see what his take is on it. He also wrote a book called Night Siege, and he discusses in depth the Hudson Valley UFO sightings, where there are over 7,000 eyewitness accounts. Contact of the Fifth Kind, what is it? We'll find out tonight. Interdimensional Universe, the new science of UFOs, paranormal phenomena, and other dimensional beings. His new book, Files from the Edge, a Paranormal Investigator's Exploration into High Strangeness, has just been released, and we're going to be talking about all of his fabulous work. Thanks so much for joining us. Hi, Philip.
Hi, it's good to be back.
How have you been? I mean, what are you up to now? I mean, you just released a great new book, by the way. I just finished reading it. It's fantastic. And, I just can't stress enough to everybody listening how incredibly huge you are in this field. And I'm really honored to have you on tonight. So thank you so much again for joining us. So where do you start with somebody when you come to this topic? I mean, you have such a phenomenal academic background. Did you ever see yourself getting into these topics?
I think I did. When I was very young, I was always looking at a mystery and the idea of outer space, the depths of the universe, the extent of the universe, what's out there, that we don't know about. And I think that most likely led to an interest in the paranormal because it's like that unknown horizon. What's over the hill? It's like what's over the hill, and it's unexplored territory, new frontiers to explore. And that I believe that what we call the paranormal and the supernatural could possibly be our science of perhaps the middle 21st century, the late 21st century, or even the 22nd century, where people in that time will look back and say, gee, a lot of these people who were studying this were probably very close to being right on target. And although there was a lot of mysticism, a lot of supernatural beliefs with all paranormal events, people that perhaps in the future will understand where they come from, and they will understand them just as much today as we understand how lightning is formed. Because back centuries ago, people thought that lightning was the act of some supernatural god because they did not understand the aspects of natural phenomena.
So you see this field as its infancy and taking off into deeper understandings of the reality of our world and beyond, yeah?
Oh, yeah, I see that happening because just in my short experience of 30 years investigating the paranormal, I have seen it evolve into mysticism, wild-eyed dreams, into a core of researchers, especially theoretical physicists, who are telling us now that all of these other dimensions exist, wormholes exist, parallel universes and realities exist. When you consider that, the paranormal doesn't become very paranormal anymore or supernatural. It becomes something that's so natural and so in the multiverse. We're not even talking about the universe anymore. We're talking about the multiverse. So it's an exciting field. I feel that I can understand how Galileo felt in the early 17th century when he first turned his telescope to the sky and saw all these amazing things that contradicted the standard beliefs at that time. I feel that, paranormal researchers are explorers trying to understand and document a new frontier.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the ancients, our ancestors, understood what we're now just beginning to?
It seems that they did, because if you look in many of the metaphysical beliefs, if you look in some of the ancient religions, especially the Hindu religion, they talk about the idea of parallel universes where there are whole different laws that take place, different gods that run them, and different people that live there. So, the idea of parallel universes is not new. Before the theoretical physicists started seeing these equations pop up on the board that predict the existence of parallel universes, the people in metaphysics, the great mystics, were telling us that they existed all along.
And, I have to say that I talked about this in the introduction briefly, but your book, Celtic Mysteries, really sparked something for me. And I've had an opportunity to travel down to some of the Putnam County chambers and experience them firsthand. And a lot of people who see them or hear stories about them kind of have this automatic interest. They're kind of drawn to them. A good friend of mine, Barbara Han Clow, researched the stone chambers back in the 1960s. She was a member of NERA. And when I told her that I was looking at these places recently, she found it very interesting because she said that the energy there, the earth energy, the geomancy, must be stirring and waking up. Then these sites were aligned with these magnetic anomalies, and I know that you talk a lot about that. And I'm curious if you have felt in all of your research over the course of the years that they understood how to cross over into these parallel universes based on the Earth's energy itself.
Yes, well, the stone chambers that are located in, New England, high concentration of them in the Hudson River Valley. As you said, they're located on magnetic anomalies. But that's not just saying the energy is there, so on and so on. I actually documented with scientific instruments that there are intense magnetic anomalies there. And I've been doing quite a bit of research with the idea that where you find negative magnetic anomalies, and when I say negative, I don't mean something evil or bad. I'm just saying where the Earth's magnetic field drops considerably. And not even the top physicists at the Lamont Doherty Observatory could understand why these readings are taking place. It seems like the magnetic field of the Earth is tunneling into a vortex out of our universe into somewhere else at these locations. I believe that these locations were built by very ancient people who marked them with these stone chambers, which are temples which actually mark the doorways or the portals from our universe to another reality or another dimension that is very close to our own. And yes, I think that what's happening now as we approach all of these fantastic things that are going to occur in the next 10 years astronomically, that the Earth's magnetic field is indeed changing, and that these areas are becoming more active because people are going out there. They're getting tons of photographs of unusual things, and also people are going out there with tape recorders. They're going out there with various other devices and picking up EVP, sounds and voices, talking in different languages, and so on and so on. So, yes, these areas, these stone chambers, I believe, at one time were active portals. Now, there's no coincidence that the concentration of the UFO sightings in the Hudson River Valley are centered around the locations of these stone chambers.
Well, let's jump into that, because there were actually literally over or around 7,000 documented cases of people reporting. And these weren't just, people, wandering around the woods, living in the woods. These were high profile, very, people, architects, businessmen, towns, politicians, those kinds of quality of people where they were coming forward and saying that they've seen something. And you had your own experience there too, correct?
This is correct. Now, people who saw this UFO, yes, are people who would not run to the police or so on to say they had a close encounter with an object that they felt was not from this world, unless they were absolutely sure. But then you have to remember that dozens and dozens of police officers, and I have them all on record, actually were sent out to find out what's going on, that had close encounters with this object also. And yes, I saw this particular UFO on 3 occasions with my entire investigating team. And people who were on that team who were once skeptical are not skeptical anymore. One thing that this UFO did in the Hudson Valley is that it totally changed the mentality of the area. From that day forward, you saw an increase in people who are trying to find out answers because they realize that the universe, that their little edge of reality and their jobs and everything else, their little security, is really not the entire picture, and that there's a bigger reality to the entire universe than they realize. And to this day, many of these people continue to have experiences in the paranormal, and it's totally changed the way people look at life. Many of the people now are into the possibilities of expanding their consciousness because they realize there's more to their life than what they thought at one time.
Do you think that, it's pretty obvious when somebody has this kind of experience that they're going to have, their psyche pretty much blown open and their whole world changes. What did you experience? What did it look like? How did that change you personally when you actually, it must be one thing to research this and to interview people, but then to have yourself see it in person. It had to be pretty impactful.
Yes, it was, because, UFO investigators are not supposed to see the UFOs. That's what happens. But, with so many sightings and this thing appearing over and over again, it was only, and I spent so much time out in the field, it was only a matter of time before, I saw it. And the first time, really, I saw it, I was just finished interviewing 12 New York State Power Authority police officers who had a close encounter with the UFO over the Indian Point nuclear reactor in Buchanan, New York. And after hearing that incredible story about how this UFO, which they said was the size of 3 football fields, decided to come over and remain stationary over reactor number 3, the only reactor that was active at the time. These were people who were hardcore police officers. Many of them had military backgrounds, intelligence backgrounds, state police backgrounds. They are not redicots. They were highly trained individuals, and they totally lost their cool that night because they realized that they were dealing with something that was totally out of their control. Now, after that interview at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm driving down on Route 9 with a friend of mine who interviewed some of the guards with me. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, heading south, and somewhere around Osney, New York, we look up, and the entire sky lit up with these flashing lights. And I'm saying, what the heck is that? And my friend who was driving slams on the brakes and goes, that's it! And he said, get in the back and get the binoculars. So we pulled over the car, and we got out, and we see this boomerang-shaped object This is, we could only see the pattern of light. It just came over. It was enormous. It was, I would say, the size of an aircraft carrier. And it was silent, and it was multicolored lights. And as it came over, it turned on its side like a Ferris wheel, and it just rolled in the sky, and then, puff, it disappeared. All the lights went out, and there was nothing in the sky. And where did it go? I mean, this was one of the trademarks of the Hudson Valley UFO. People were sure that they saw this solid object in the sky. Yet, a moment later, the object would just change shape, fold down on itself, or just completely disappear and reappear in another section of the sky. Back then, of course, that puzzled a lot of people. But today, when we talk about the ability of these things to possibly slide in and out of dimensions that are around us that we as three-dimensional beings cannot see, it makes more sense. Now, the second sighting that I had of this object was very bizarre. I was doing a TV show at the University of Bridgeport on the Hudson Valley UFO. Now, the show ended around 8:30. It was in December. And as I'm walking out to the parking lot with my friend who was a police officer who was investigating the cases with me, looked up in the sky, and there it was, over Bridgeport, Connecticut. And that night, for example, in the Bridgeport, Connecticut area and the Fairfield, Connecticut area, Westport, hundreds and hundreds of people saw this object, and, it resulted in so many calls to the police stations that the phone lines were jammed. And I said to myself, this can't be happening. I just did a show on this thing. I thought somebody was playing a giant cosmic joke on me.
Are you familiar with the Philadelphia experiment, where the military is said to have done experiments with a ship down in that port there? I kind of can't recall. I can't recall the details of it right now, but they were testing. Just doing that, flipping in and out of dimensions. It's supposedly. Have you ever any thoughts on that being related to what you saw?
Oh, sure. The Philadelphia experiment was, all the information that we have on the Philadelphia experiment, I believe, is misinformation, and they tried to cover up really what happened. Now, what happened is that Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who, by the way, people don't know who he was the foremost world's authority on UFOs. Dr. Hynek passed over in 1986, but from 1951 until 1969, he was the Air Force consultant to Project Blue Book. Now, Dr. Hynek always kept a very conservative picture of UFOs publicly because he wanted to keep it respectable. But there was a lot going on that he knew about, that he confided in me about a lot of things going on that was totally amazing. Now, he told me a story that he got a message from someone who would only identify themselves as Carlos. And he rendezvoused with him in Mexico. And he said he met him, and this fellow was a vagabond, but he was an American. And he said the person claimed that he was on the run because people in the United States government and the intelligence organization were trying to hunt him down and kill him. He claimed that he was an officer, a lieutenant commander, during the Philadelphia experiment. And that he said that the original project was to try to make ships invisible on radar or invisible in the water. Now, they used a series of high-frequency generators to actually bend light around the ship. But the result is that the ship disappeared, and it was gone. And then a few seconds later, it reappears several hundred miles later in another location. But when the tracking beacon appeared once again in the radio receivers, of course, the people who were involved in this experiment was naval intelligence. And that's an interesting fact because during the first UFO sightings, the first agency to get involved in tracking down these UFOs secretly was not the Air Force, was not the CIA or the NSA. It was naval intelligence. Now, when they got to the ship, they only found half the crew there. Some of them were like totally irrational, and a few of them were rational. And according to them, they were gone for weeks. But according to our time, they were only gone a few seconds. They told a story about how they slipped into this fog area and that these beings appeared who had an interest in them and slowly came and plucked them off the ship one by one, then put them back like they were experimenting with them. They said they looked like giant insects. And so I said to Dr. Hynek, well, do you believe this story? He said, well, you know, this person didn't seem like he was lying and he was scared all the time. And I said, well, what did you do after that? He says, well, after we finished the story, I gave him some money and he went on his way. So now, how true the story is, I don't know, but that was the Philadelphia experiment. But what leaked out later was later rewritten by a number of different authors, and I feel that Dr. Hynek was probably told the correct information, and the books we have about the Philadelphia experiment, all the crazy websites, is nothing more than information that filtered through the public to try to hide the true nature of this experiment and what happened. The final word from this Carlos character was to Dr. Hynek that we opened a window and we can't close it now. And it's interesting because after that, you know, we started seeing the appearance of these triangular-shaped craft.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that because it seems like, you know, when you were telling the story, it was very much like some of the accounts that people have shared with you over the years in the course of your books. I've read all your books, by the way, and so all the cases are very, very well put together and very well documented and presented. And a lot of the stories, you know, we're not talking a ship here, but sometimes we're talking about people and just having these kinds of, you know, floating in and out of places. What kind of, you know, and when you said insects, I think you have documented, you know, many cases where people have had some kind of experience with beings that are insect-like. What kind of beings do people mostly experience when they have these kinds of interdimensional UFO-like experiences?
Well, the majority of these cases that I feel, you know, are interdimensional in nature are more like reptilian sort of characters, almost gargoyle-looking. Some are almost like insect-looking, almost like giant praying mantis and so on. But also these beings who, or whatever they are, they seem to also have the ability to change shape. So whoever they are not physical beings in the way that we understand, you know, atoms and molecules. But the cases are, you know, just increasing in number. It's like, you know, these portals are opening up and we're not closing them.
Do you think the stone chambers in the northeastern United States are portals of sorts, if you know how to use them? It just seems kind of like, you know, our ancestors may have used, you know, ceremony and sound and maybe even some lost technology. What are your thoughts on these actual places being doorways into other worlds?
Well, I think they are because recently there have been encounters at these places with hooded beings. Now, the fact is that the Native Americans know of these structures, and most of them are on what was once sacred ground, and they claim that was the doorway from our world to the world of spirits. And, of course, the spirit world, they could consider it to be this other reality of dimensions, and these are places where you would go to meditate and fast, to commune with the so-called gods. And today, people are having experiences there. Of course, people are not identifying the experiences today as religious experiences. They're identifying them today as paranormal experiences.
And do you have any insight onto how you think they may have used these chambers? I mean, do you have any insight perhaps or thoughts on, what exactly the protocol was in opening these kind of places?
I don't. And I don't. They may naturally open from time to time at certain points of the year on the calendar. We do see an increase of the number of reports and photographs at certain times of the year. I did a study on that and graphed the information. But you have to remember that the amount of research that still needs to be done on these structures is still vast. Plus, there's a lot of resistance because, there's a lot of people who claim to be archaeologists that belong to certain organizations that, want to study these things from an archaeological point of view. And when you bring up the paranormal happenings around there, it's like a stigmata. Oh, no, we can't mention that stuff with this stuff here. Oh, no, we'd have to look for Vikings and things like that. And I said to them, my studies show at this point that these things even predate the Celts. These chambers may be as old as 8,000 years old. They may be as older than Stonehenge.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to, I'm sure you've previewed the sites or at least studied them on some extent, the Orkney Islands. When I looked at pictures of those, I felt like they were very distinctively close, if not identical, to some of the stone chambers that I've seen personally. Have you had a chance to take a look at those?
Oh, yes, I have. And there is a similarity. And because there was, one way to build the stones. I mean, there's a certain architectural technique that was used to build structures like this a long time ago. People knew how to lift these massive stones and build these structures, and they're not randomly placed. All of these places are on magnetic anomalies, and more research is being done to prove this. I started the research documenting these things on magnetic anomalies back in the early 90s, and some people have followed up with research and have continued my research and have shown that they're not randomly placed. People had to design where these structures are, wherever they are across the world.
Yeah. Well, I was just actually a couple of weeks ago back down in Putnam County, and I was taking a look at the King's Chamber site. And we were there. I was there with a couple people. I've met some very wonderful and extraordinary people down in Putnam County who have been very gracious with guiding me around and showing me different places. But we were actually taking a look at the King's Chamber, and one of the people with us mentioned that this particular chamber was aligned with an 18-year lunar cycle, and that if you stand up on top of this chamber and you overlook what looks like a very kind of almost, valley of sorts in front of you, and the trees are probably less than 40, 50 years old, so you can imagine that place cleared. I'm curious, though, what was their purpose? Do you have any insight on that 18-year lunar cycle? And why is that one so much bigger than most of the other ones?
Yes, well, no, I don't have any information on the lunar cycle, but I did find a stone there, a flat stone that was placed in the ground, not far from the location. Matter of fact, right out in front of the smaller chamber that's on the other side, only about 60 feet away from the King's Chamber. And on this flat stone was carved a crescent moon, which had the position of two what I consider planets, and they seem to be Venus and Jupiter in conjunction with the moon. Somebody was probably trying to say that this chamber was built when these objects were in conjunction. And, I went back in my planetarium program trying to get almost a close alignment, and I come up with a number of alignments, but the closest one to that was like 2,820 BC. And so it's pretty amazing. Now, the King's Chamber is big. It is one of the biggest, okay? I believe it is the biggest, but I think there's one that's in Brewster, New York, that is bigger, that's on private property. Now, I believe that chamber was used for shelter, and that the chamber that's on the other side and that path that leads to it that was built up with stone, which we call the tomb, was used to place a body. And that was a ceremonial place. There's a slab in the back of the chamber that's the tomb. It's one of the only chambers that goes slightly underground. It's carved in the bedrock, and it's large enough to place a body on. And I believe that a body was placed in there, and that the people who built the chambers used the king chamber for lodging, protection, and all of these chambers, by the way, were built for multi-purposes. And what happened is that the Druids believe that, from this world you pass on to the next world. And where you go depends upon your stature, your standing, your education, your knowledge, who you are, how important you are. So bodies were placed in certain areas which were sacred. And we find these sacred areas now are enveloped by intense negative magnetic anomalies. The Druid priest would, in fact, do some type of ceremony, which was called the ceremony of stones. We don't understand because there's no written record of it except what was carried down by mouth and written by other people who heard of it a long time ago. They would contain the spirit in the chamber until the proper doorway can be opened so that person can move on to the place where he's supposed to go. And then the body was taken out after that was done, and the body was just burned. But the thing is that this opens up the idea that these chambers are portals not to one reality, but they can be opened up to multiple doorways to multiple realities.
Have you heard of Amaru's doorway in Lake Titicaca in Peru?
I have.
And have you been there by any chance?
No.
No, it's one of my places I'd like to get to. But I have been kind of researching some people who've been there personally, and some of their experiences have been rather extraordinary, where they walk up to this gigantic, stone doorway looking thing, and there's a small little area where you can actually lean down or put your knees on, and they place their forehead to the stone. And some people have reported just immediate kind of paranormal, quote, paranormal experiences where their consciousness literally goes into the rock and goes into other points of time. And I'm curious because it just really seems to me like they really got it. This was a form of communication with, other dimensions. I just, when they talk about dream time and spirit world, and I really think that they were going into these places consciously with consciousness, and, had opened up doorways in that sense. And then I think when we, our enlightened society that we are, played around with the bending light to become invisible, and we rip open tears and, things we don't really quite understand yet. It's interesting that these kinds of experiences are now looking back at us and kind of seeing what we are and how to come in and all of that stuff. Why do you think that the UFO sightings in the Northeast have kind of calmed down now?
They're starting to pick up again. And I can only say that it's interesting that the paranormal events around the chambers have increased in that area, and also the UFO sightings are starting to increase again in that area. Now, will we see another reemergence of the incredible, sightings of the Hudson Valley? I don't know. I can't say. I hope we do, because I'll be ready this time. And the thing is when those sightings took place, UFOs were still, nobody really wanted to do UFO stories anymore. And we didn't really have the internet. We really didn't have the media like we have today and the communications that we have today. If the Hudson Valley sightings, like they occurred back then, occurred today, it would make a very dramatic impact on the world, and everyone would be convinced of the reality of this phenomena that we call UFOs. So I think that as we're approaching 2012 and beyond, that we are going to see changes in the Earth's magnetic field and conditions on Earth that are going to reactivate these portals. And I think I see that happening now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, in your book, Contact of the Fifth Kind, what, for those people listening who may have not had a chance to read your book, what does that mean?
Well, Contact of the Fifth Kind is, it was my exploration of the contact phenomena. Contact of the Fifth Kind is out of print. I mean, you can get used copies. But I have another book coming out in December called Ultra-Terrestrial Contacts, which is, in fact, a newer version and super updated version of Contact of the Fifth Kind. You see, Contact of the Fifth Kind, I'm still in sort of, kind of like the possibility, the extraterrestrial hypotheses. And the thing is that Ultra-Terrestrial Contacts coming out in December is my continued investigation into the claims of people claiming contact with an alien intelligence. And not only are some of the classic cases that are presented in Contact of the Fifth Kind presented in the book, but they're updated, and also new cases that support much of the unsupported data in Contact of the Fifth Kind. So, I'm hoping that, when people read the book, people who have been silent will come forward with their piece of the puzzle so that we can put this information together and truly understand what's going on.
Because in this book you claim that our own government has allowed aliens to abduct and experiment on U.S. citizens in exchange for technological secrets. Do you still believe that?
I don't know. Because, this is the story I heard. This is what people are telling me. And it's been verified in a number of different ways with contacts that I have in the military and also through Dr. Hynek. But the thing is that they may have some type of deal or arrangement with some type of intelligence. And this may be the case. But as I say in the book, I cannot prove this story. This is what's been told to me. Take it for whatever it's worth, but it is a possibility we have to consider that the United States government or certain aspects of the United States government know all about this. And, they actually been trying to get technology from these creatures, beings, or extraterrestrials. Could be a multiple origin of this phenomena. But one thing that has happened is that interdimensional beings. Now I'm hearing stories about there's a special unit in the government that's trying to track down these dimensional beings that enter in and out of our reality through a technology. They're trying to capture these beings in order to obtain and capture this technology so that they can travel through dimensions. I mean, in the Hudson Valley area and Pine Bush on numerous occasions, there's been a strong military presence that actually cordoned off. They blocked off an entire area and told people to stay in their houses, and people are looking out their windows and seeing all of these military jeeps and soldiers running around, and they were told it's just a training exercise, stay in your house. Now, what's going on? I mean, could these stories be true? I don't know, but it's a possibility we have to, in fact, consider. Now, in March, I have another book coming out, March of 2011, called Djinn. The Vengeful Djinn, The Hidden Agenda Behind the Genie, which I co-authored with Rosemary Ellen Guiley. And this talks about the dimensional beings, and it puts a name on them, the Islamic Jinn. People in Islam knew about these dimensional beings for 1,000 years. And they knew that there was another reality where creatures' intelligence exist, and they called them jinn, which is, was a Muslim word for hidden. Now, the book stems on the fact that in the 1990s I was over in the Middle East, and I was doing quite a bit of research on something else, then accidentally got interested in the idea of jinn because I heard so many stories about these dimensional beings. But while I was over there, it's a very long story, and I won't get into it, but while I was over there, I got information that there was a special unit composed of Saudi military, American military, and certain other European countries like England that were trying to capture these jinn entities to obtain their technology once again on how they enter our world from theirs. So this is the second time I heard it in two different parts of the world. So when you start hearing things like that, it puts more credibility in the idea that this stuff is very real.
It sounds like a science fiction movie coming out of Hollywood.
Make a great science fiction movie.
but the cases are they're so impossible to dismiss because there's so many of them. You cover such a wide spectrum of people and places and different accounts that it's really quite impressive to sit down and read some of these and really wonder. It makes you think, why do you think that government doesn't want us to know?
I don't think it's the government as a whole. I think it's a very small unit in the government that has control over this, and very few people actually get the information that they're finding out. They seem to be very powerful individuals, and I believe that first reason why they don't want people to know is they don't want people to think that there's something roaming around their backyards and things they can't see, and that would greatly affect the way people think if they came out and said that. I think it's to control fear. The second reason is that they may be doing some type of dirty, underhanded things that they don't want the population to know about in regard to this type of research. And the third possible reason is they want to keep it as secret as possible if they are able to obtain any technology from this, or if they haven't already. So there could be multiple reasons. But since World War II, people are very, very happy, especially, older people, to let the government do their thing and be completely ignorant as to what goes on in research like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it just seems, kind of odd how so much information is available to people. It really kind of makes you wonder, how much of it is disinformation and how much of it is really authentic information. How do you tell the difference?
You don't. You just have to do the research yourself and put the pieces together. We're like children watching a magician on stage. And the magician is doing all of these amazing things. Yet our parents tell us that there's no such thing as magic. But we're watching the magician, and we can't possibly explain how the magician is doing all these amazing things. The only way that we are going to really find out what's going on is if the magician would take us on stage and show us how the trick is done. Mm-hmm. Then we'll understand. But I don't think that's going to happen in the near future.
And so when you're out in the world researching this, do you ever come across obstacles or problems because of the areas that you're going into?
Sometimes you get resistance from, local authorities and stuff like that. The sheriff's office in certain areas in Putnam County, I'm not exactly their favorite character, because I have a tendency, when I go into an area to write about it, and it brings a lot of people out there, and it causes problems, they claim. Also, I've accidentally or encroached on a number of security areas. But also you have to remember that before the publication of my book, Night Siege, I was contacted by the Air Force. And I'm the first civilian UFO investigator to be contacted by the Air Force directly since 1969 after they said they had no interest in UFOs. And their main concern was to find out what was in the manuscript of Night Siege. This was just before it was published, because their idea was they did not want to start a UFO panic, but they said they were very concerned about the sightings in the Hudson Valley. I mean, I had a 45-minute interview with the major. I mean, it was obviously this person was just collecting information for someone else. He was just doing his job. But the fact is that if the Air Force and the government has no interest in this phenomenon, they say it doesn't exist, why did they take all that time to find out what I knew about these UFO sightings and what information and what documentation I had?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And you don't find any, a lot of people write about, who talk about these kind of topics having some kind of, threat involved in their lives, or people who talk about this. You've never experienced that yourself?
Well, I had a meeting with an NSA agent, and we had a video of the Hudson Valley UFO at the time, and he wanted the video. And he was very friendly about it, and I wouldn't give him the video, of course, This was back in 1984, and he says, Phil, the government has done away with people for less.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he was threatening me. I think that the fact that he was merely stating a truth.
Yeah. And you didn't give it to him.
But, no, I didn't give it to him. I mean, I had other witnesses. They're all saying, they all looked at me like, who is this guy? What is he saying? Yeah, he was an NSA, worked for the NSA.
I wonder if that would go over so well today.
I don't know. The thing is that, although I've been contacted by the Air Force, and after the Indian Point nuclear plant sightings, because of the bad publicity of the plant, I mean, I was harassed, I have to say harassed by the New York Power Authority and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the FBI because they did not want information released about the sightings on that plant because they claimed, from their point of view, what I was told would jeopardize security. So what they tried to do is they tried to stop the publication of Night Siege. But, with the good advice and the help of the late John Fuller, who was, a great researcher himself in his day, he was author of, The Incident at Exeter, the Barney and Betty Hill story, The Interrupted Journey, and also The Ghosts of Flight 401, he said, don't let those guys bully you around. You just keep on doing what we'll do. We'll take them to court. This is, this is America, he said. They can't do this. And the book was published, and the story of the Indian Point was in the book. And but the downside on that is that the people in the area have been trying to shut down that reactor for so many years. Now, after the book comes out, there's a big rally at Indian Point protesting nuclear power. The organizers bought several hundred copies of Night Siege and handed them out free to the demonstrators and the people attending with the chapter marked Incident at Indian Point, saying on the loudspeaker, how can we trust the security of this plant? The guards are seeing flying saucers. I mean, so after that, I was not too popular with people around that plant.
Well, Phil, at least it's validation that your work is getting out there and people are paying attention. It's a tricky thing. I give you a lot of credit. I give everybody who's out there in this way and really looking into these things. These things have kind of fallen into my lap over the last few years, and over the course of doing the show for a couple of years and talking to people and previewing, hundreds of books for different guests and stuff. Of course, I've come across this topic, and it's always kind of like I pick it up and I look at it and I turn it around and I feel it out. And if it doesn't quite feel right, I put it back and I leave it alone. But there have been a couple things over the course of the years, and your books have been one of them, that have really kind of put together a lot of pieces of a puzzle that many other authors, I think, have the intention of trying to do. They just don't do it as carefully. as you do, because you really take the time to come from just a kind of a neutral perspective. You don't have an agenda. You're not trying to prove anything. You just present the facts, and you leave it up to the reader to really make those decisions themselves. And I really appreciate that in your books. So in the last 3 minutes of the show or so, what's the message that you're hoping your books are going to give to the world? I mean, what's your hope that when your readers read these books and absorb these information, it's kind of like having a UFO experience, because their psyches open up to something that maybe they hadn't really seen before. So what's the message that you're hoping your books are going to give people?
Well, the message is that, we're entering a new reality here, and people are having paranormal experiences. And that, if you read my books, you're going to see that, people around the world, people, especially in this country, people are experiencing this phenomena. You're not the only one, but you should not keep your experiences silent because of fear of ridicule. There are people who will listen to you, and you may have a very important piece of the information. Besides, people who are in this that have their own agendas for whatever reason, there are serious researchers that are trying to document this and establish the foundation for a new knowledge, a new science that I believe is going to come out of this someday.
Yeah, and I think you're changing consciousness by presenting this material to people. And sometimes, this is a big question to ask in the last part of the show, but there's been talk about good versus bad beings and them having their own agendas and stuff. So hopefully your new book will address some of that and clarify some of that. We're actually out of time. I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing this information with myself and my listeners. And I just have to say, guys, his books are extraordinary. They're very, very well done, and I have really enjoyed them, as I've told you. So go out and get a copy. I know I bring a lot of authors on the show, and I share a lot of really great works. But Philip's kind of exceed my expectations when I picked up copies of these, and I have ordered the out-of-print books, and they have been very, very good. So in closing, Philip, I just want to express my gratitude towards you and your work, and I have a lot of respect for you and the things that you share. So again, thank you very much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I always enjoy it.
Well, everybody, we're out of time, and I hope you'll join me next week. And until then, live well. Namaste.